Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. I'm Kenny Rice. Thank you for tuning in again this week on YouTube or listening to us on iTunes or Google Play. Now downloaded in 22 countries, as well as just about every portion of the U.S. we've heard from. That's great, because we have great guests like this that bring you more than just the, hey, wonder who's going to win the race. How about how things get done behind the scenes in horse racing, which also includes behind the scenes in producing horse racing and getting it on TV. And one of the best is Lindsay Schanzer. I've had the pleasure of working with her for years at NBC. Lindsay will be one of the producers this weekend on the Breeders' Cup shows, and she joins us from the site right now. Lindsay, welcome in.
Kenny, glad to be here.
So now, how much preparation have you been doing already as we count down? This will air about two days out from the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, it's been quite a bit. It kind of shocks your system a little bit when you get into the Breeders' Cup. I forget every year just how much it is. I'm lucky enough to work on the Triple Crown, and that's a lot of content. The Kentucky Derby, for example, is like a 5-hour show on NBC, but here covering 14 World Championships racing for several hours on Friday and then again on Saturday across the board. It, like I said, it really shocks your system. So the preparation has been ongoing for weeks, months even. We've been kind of getting our arms around things, planning the physical production process, staffing, and making sure the logistics are in place. And then as the fields take shape, and now that the draw is out, really getting kind of the editorial in place and putting formats together. So we have a minute-by-minute plan of what's coming at you.
And Lindsay, I've always thought when some of my friends will ask me that not everybody I know actually is into horse racing. And I know you know that, obviously, in your world covering all these other sports. But I have friends say, what's that Breeders' Cup like? I say, imagine if they had like a lot of playoff games in one day. I mean, like an overload of playoff. You got all the NFL playoff games crammed into like one day is kind of like a Breeders' Cup almost.
Totally. It's one of the reasons I love this event. I mean, not that covering other horse racing isn't great also, but, you're usually building up to whatever that featured race is. And there's certainly that here with the Breeders' Cup Classic, which is the richest of the races and the most, carries the most prestige, let's say. But really, at the end of the day, every single race is important, and the reactions are going to be, they're going to be incredible for every single one of the 14 races, because like I said, they're world championships, and it's 14, and it's one after the other after the other after the other, and it means the world to every one of the connections who's involved with it. And there are pretty big time purses involved as well. So I love this event. It's nonstop action and excitement.
Yeah, it's kind of like a marathon that goes forward in a sprint motion, isn't it? Because, when we're out there and I'm listening to you tell me where you want me to go do an interview or not do an interview or whatever, and then suddenly I realize, wow, we're like, we only got like 2 races to go. It just zooms by. It's amazing.
Just whips by. Absolutely does. It absolutely does. I don't know where the time goes. We've got, 4 hours on Friday, and it'll go by in a flash.
Lindsay Schanzer, NBC, one of the producers who produces many other sports, works on many other sports. And is there any kind of correlations you can make between like horse racing and football or Olympic coverage or some of the other sports you work?
Yeah, it's a really unique sport to cover. I think for me, in some ways, obvious reasons, I kind of related to track and field in a lot of ways, and definitely more Olympics coverage than something like football. There's a little bit of the football type element to it, but just to give you an idea of what kind of horse racing coverage is, it's a little bit more of a studio show than anything else, with little pockets of live action that you have to react to, sort of squeezed in there across whatever the coverage is. So it can be very formatted, as I know from all the meetings that we'll do in any kind of event like this. Like I said, second by second, minute by minute plans from tip to tail of coverage that say, we're going to go to this place, we're going to talk about this horse, we're going to meet this connection, this interview, see this feature, and all of a sudden 20 minutes has gone by and you're prepped to the race, and then there's the 2 minutes of action and we react to the live scene, and then all of a sudden you go right back to that studio atmosphere. So it's really unique, and then it's not one or the other like most sports are. But in terms of coverage, when I say it's a little bit like track and field, the races are similar like that. Obviously, there's the round track, and the physical races are similar. But I find it to be like Olympic coverage and track and field coverage in particular, because we really do our best to give you a reason to care about the race that's happening. And horse racing lends itself really well to that. Even though we're working with animals, they all have human connections. So I really enjoy covering this sport because we get to introduce people more often than not, particularly in events like the Kentucky Derby, where more people watch than maybe they do other races, or the Breeders' Cup, where you get a new and bigger audience. You introduce people to connections they've never heard of before. It could be Bob Baffert that they've never seen before, or it could be, a group of Mongolian owners who've got
Right.
a horse Mongolian groom in the Classic that's a major long shot, but they're going to be, 20, 30 of them in the winner's circle going out of their minds like they were when they won last time. So I love that aspect of it, giving people a reason to root. You tell the stories of where they came from and why they love what they're doing, and that's something I love. And I think that's similar to the way at least NBC does its Olympic coverage. Not that I don't love telling stories about Tom Brady, but for the most part, the majority of this country knows a lot about Tom Brady at this point. And by the way, I tip my hat to producer Fred Godelli on Sunday Night Football, who finds new ways to tell you about Tom Brady, because God knows we know a lot about him. But on the flip side, with the Olympics and with horse racing, often I find we have a little bit more of a clean slate to really introduce people to who we're covering.
And you mentioned Fred. He was on our show early on when we were talking. We had a Super Bowl weekend show. We had Fred and Bill Parcells on talking about football.
That's a big one.
Yeah, but he pointed out, and I saw him right after the Derby this year. And we certainly know what happened after the Derby this year for 22 minutes. And he was just talking. He was just talking about the unpredictability, because I was saying, unlike football, they don't have a sports information publicist bringing the trainers to you. It's kind of like you just go grab them. And he was saying, the unpredictability. First thing he says to me afterwards, he's walking out of the TV compound, I said, what did we say about the unpredictability? Because we thought we'd seen everything, and then we had 22 minutes to decide the Derby winner.
That's right. And then when it's something you've never seen happen before, you also realize some of those systems maybe aren't in place, and it takes something like this to happen for those systems to be created. But it definitely makes that first time out a little bit more complicated.
Yeah. And what you brought up a perfect point, talking with Lindsay Schanzer of NBC Sports. She'll be one of the producers of the Breeders' Cup coverage this week, which biasly I think is just outstanding. And I'm proud to be part of it. And so
and we're proud to have you with us.
Oh, thank you. I wasn't fishing too much, was I? But thank you. But you made the point, like about Tom Brady. We know about that. It's like when I was a kid sitting with my dad watching baseball games, growing up a St. Louis Cardinals fan. They would always say, runners on base, 2 men out, 3-2 count, runners going. They still say it the other night at the World Series. So we know that. But not everyone, and that includes me, grew up in the horse racing world. And so, you could say, hey, they worked in 58-2 this morning. I don't understand. I know what it means now. Back then I didn't. But that's the thing that I think you always have to kind of tell the story. You don't want to dumb it down. But I think most of the people tuning in are casual horse racing fans, or horse racing people that aren't into the inside baseball part of it.
You're right. I mean, you make a really good point. It's definitely a delicate balance that we have to find. And it varies a little bit based on show. Like I said, with the Kentucky Derby, you have a majority brand new audience that really only watches horse racing maybe once a year. And maybe you can. I don't want to use the phrase "dumb it down," like you said. We try not to use that, but you really want to teach that audience a little bit, give them an opportunity to understand. But throughout the rest of the year, we try to do that as well, because we don't want to isolate anyone. We don't want to exclude anybody. But you have to find a delicate balance, because we also serve a niche audience that is really passionate, made up of really passionate fans who love this sport and know it more than I do, frankly. And luckily we have experts like yourself and the rest of our crew here that helps us get those points across. But we try to serve both audiences. So we try to teach, and we try to inform the audience that is already pretty well aware, and give them our expertise and help them make maybe more informed, intricate decisions, while also explaining something a little bit far, from 30,000 feet for the rest of the audience. But it's definitely it's more difficult with a sport with a smaller audience throughout the year than something like football.
We're talking with Lindsay Schanzer of NBC Sports, one of the producers of the Breeders' Cup coverage coming up Friday and Saturday on NBCSN. The Classic will be on NBC. When we come back, we'll talk a little more about getting ready for the big shows this weekend here on the Horse Racing Show. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show, episode 41. We get ready for the Breeders' Cup, and no one better that I wanted to talk to this week than Lindsay Schanzer. She's one of the producers for NBC Sports, and it's a daunting task to put on all this live horse racing on both Friday and Saturday. You can see it on NBCSN. The Classic will be in prime time on NBC, and it's all on your shoulders, Lindsay. That's a lot of stuff.
It's only half on my shoulders, in fact.
I know.
To be clear.
Is Billy
so
Matthews nearby?
I get to share it. That's right.
Is Billy nearby? I know.
He's not. So don't worry. You can say whatever you want about him.
Okay. We were talking earlier, and you compared it, I think, astutely about the track and field in the Olympic competition to the Breeders' Cup, because you have international competition, you have different distances, and you have a lot of different participants all coming together, and not everyone is familiar with them, and you've got a few hours to explain it all as you watch the action unfold.
That's right. That's what we try to do. And you make a good point again about it. I've even forgotten up until this point. Not only do we have, 12, 14, however many runners in each of these 14 World Championship races, but they may not be familiar with each other, and some are coming from across the pond and aren't used to these tracks, and they've shipped over and are used to different running styles, what have you. And we have to introduce people not only to the faces they may already be familiar with or who we are familiar with, but then we familiarize ourselves with people that we don't get to see throughout the year, or horses we don't get to see throughout the year.
I've had famous trainers, and I won't embarrass them because I think it's happened to all of us reporters too at times, is that you expect, they don't know each other. It's not that close fraternity that some people think from West Coast to East Coast. There's exceptions like a Baffert who Pletcher and these guys that train all over. But a lot of times I've had trainers ask me, just curious, in the paddock, say, is that guy? And I go, yeah, that's that guy. Because like you said, it's not like football. It's not like, when, Notre Dame, I believe you know something about Notre Dame.
A little something.
Yeah.
I do.
So when your alma mater's out there playing, you probably are familiar with the coach of any of the schools they're playing. At least you know who he is from sight,
That's right. By the way, I wish you had brought up Notre Dame a week ago, because now I'm slightly embarrassed.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Domer.
Boy, I guess I lost about 2 hits this weekend, didn't I? There. Sorry. No, but I want to ask you because you went to school there, and that's one of the iconic places. And I understand Billy Joel's doing a concert there next year too, I believe.
That's what I heard.
Yeah.
That's what I heard. Unfortunately, you'll understand and appreciate this. I'm lucky enough to cover what's actually probably my favorite event of the year in horse racing, an event called Royal Ascot, which I'm sure this audience is familiar with. And
yes.
The Saturday of Royal Ascot is the same day that Billy Joel will be at Notre Dame Stadium. So unfortunately, I don't see myself attending. But I'm a huge Billy Joel fan. Humongous.
Yeah, I've seen him I think I've seen him like 4 times, including the 5th time I saw him with Elton John when they toured together.
That was my first ever concert.
Really?
It was, yeah.
That's starting at the top, isn't it? You go see those two guys together.
It's all downhill from there.
It's tough to equal that. But, I was going to get, you've been at one of the great venues many times at Notre Dame.
Yep.
It's iconic. And I think, I remember I had a chance to interview Aaron Rodgers one time, and, I pointed out that him, he's obviously plays in another iconic place, Lambeau Field, all the time for the Packers.
Yeah.
And he talked about Churchill Downs being similar to, places that you want to see. And I think Santa Anita is probably, certainly for horse racing fans and maybe casual fans in general, it's kind of like maybe it's not, maybe it's Dodger Stadium compared to Fenway Park or Wrigley Field, but it's one of those places that's just great to see.
Definitely. And listen, lucky for us in the business we're in, it looks great on television. And there's nothing better than, the unbelievable view of the St. Gabriel Mountains in the background. We have something on this show that we call the gyro cam, which I'm not sure is the official name, but that's what we call it. And it's a camera essentially affixed to a moving vehicle. And that camera works along the backstretch and it moves in tandem with, the horse likely in front or whatever, whomever, and you have that view of the mountains in the background, and there's
Wow.
just nothing like it. As much as I love the Twin Spires and Churchill Downs, and obviously that's iconic, there really is something special about being out here, and
Yeah.
you can feel the history, obviously, of the great race place, and the Breeders' Cup history is pretty extensive. So,
Yeah.
back for a record 10th time.
It is. It's one of my favorite places to go to. And how many cameras? Do you know how many cameras we'll have out there?
You put me on the spot,
No,
and
I'm
I really
sorry.
should
I
know this.
take
No,
it
no,
back. No,
that's okay.
I should have asked you in advance. I just know there's, I was just, people ask me, I go, I don't know. I know there's like, I look around and I see the other reporters, I'll see like Brittany over there, Donna's over there, Nick's over there. We all got cameras. I don't know,
There are
there's like
cameras
seven,
everywhere.
there's like 40
We have
cameras or something. It's crazy.
definitely. We have at least 50 cameras on the Kentucky Derby, and it's
Yeah.
not quite as many as the Derby, but it's north of, it's up in that 30 to 40 range. Absolutely. It's pretty extensive coverage here. We absolutely have the grounds covered. And like you said, we're lucky to have a lot of roving reporters who can really get access to different connections and be in the right place at the right time to make sure we have all the information we need. And we're lucky to have the camera complement to support you guys. So we have a lot of moving cameras.
And it's so much bigger than a football game. I mean, the expanse of not just Santa Anita, but a track in general, be it at Belmont or be it at Churchill Downs, that's a lot of area to cover, and
It is. It makes it really, really difficult. And, it makes it interesting, and making the puzzle pieces work is really exciting. And it's something I really enjoy about the job. It's definitely a unique challenge. Like you said, you compare it to something like a football game or a basketball game, a hockey game, where there's a fixed field of play. And, the track is a field of play, but we're not just covering the track. We're really covering the venue, and it's immense. So we want to be able to get into all kinds of places, and in order to get signals from different places, particularly inside this track, is not easy. So we have all kinds of cameras. We have aerial coverage, we have cabled handheld cameras, roving cameras, steady cameras that will, make sure you're not dizzy when we're following the horses out in the post parade.
Yeah.
High cameras to make sure we're following the action, scissor lift cameras all over the place, just to make sure we have every piece of the grounds covered.
And from a social standpoint, I don't know if there's a more social sport. I realize there's tailgating's huge in football. Believe me, you grew up in the South, tailgating in football. It's like it's state laws, by the way, in Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia. They have to tailgate. I believe it's state laws. So
Wow.
Yeah, you know how big that tailgating stuff. So it's all social. We know a lot of sports. But, horse racing, they kind of dress up. You mentioned like Royal Ascot in the Kentucky Derby. And we'll see it at the Breeders' Cup. I think there's probably more fashion sensitive people going to these than most sporting events I go to. I don't see them at boxing matches, in other words.
Definitely not. People dress a certain way when they come to horse racing events, and the bigger events get, I think, the more fashionable people, or the people that put more into what they're wearing. The Derby, the Breeders' Cup, like I said, is definitely one of them. And the fact that we're in Santa Anita, which is just in the shadow of Los Angeles, there's a sense of Hollywood glamour that's always been a part of a Breeders' Cup that's associated with Santa Anita. And it just makes for a great event. Like you said, it's social, and I don't get the chance, unfortunately, to go to a lot of racing because I'm usually covering it. But when I do, it's a blast. It's a great event to go to with a group of friends, and you get dressed up, which, you don't necessarily always get the chance to do when you're going to an event that's social. Like you said, you can, if you're of age, partake in, drinking. Look, there's going to be great food here. I know they have celebrity chefs all over the grounds. And then, of course, there's the betting. You can get involved and feel like you really have a stake in what's happening. And it's allowed. It's happening on site, and you can be invested from tip to tail.
Well, it's going to be a fun time. It's going to be an exciting time, and it's going to be a lot of work for Lindsay Schanzer and all the people at NBC behind the scenes while the rest of us roam around and talk to people. And
it will, but I have, I should just say, I have the absolute best crew in the world, and the folks on NBC's horse racing coverage are the absolute best, and it's a big crew of over 200 people we have here working between cameras, production, everything. And I believe it's the best in the business, so we're pretty lucky.
Well, thank you, and thank you for being on with us, and I will see you in about like a day. So, and we'll start having meetings and get ready.
Can't wait.
Thank you. Lindsay
Thanks, Kenny.
Schanzer.
Safe travels.
Thank you, Lindsay. Lindsay Schanzer from NBC Sports. She'll be one of the producers on all the Big Breeders' Cup coverage this weekend on the network.